let's talk a little bit about servant leadership. Robert Greenleaf is sometimes credited as being the father of servant leadership. Greenleaf was the acting CEO of Ma Bell, back when Ma Bell was the player in technology and telephones. Greenleaf's focus was on providing service to anybody who had a phone. And I can tell you, if you probably talked to your parents, you guys were alive in the 60s, most of you, but if you were alive in the 60s or 70s, you know that sometimes you had a storm and the phones were back before electricity was on. AT&T, Ma Bell, her focus was on service. Get those phones up and get them running. They're depending, whatever it takes. And the telephone repair guys were out there fixing the wires before the storm was passed. But the guys restoring the electricity, they waited until conditions got better. Because that was Greenleaf. He says, no, we are in a service industry. We're here to provide service to our customers. Without their phones, they can't call for emergencies. They can't get the help that they need. Servant leadership is really built on the idea of serving first and leading second. You see, servant leadership is an oxymoron, isn't it? It's a paradox. It puts service in front of leadership. Most of us think of leaders as being in the front of the parade. Servant leaders are in the parade. Sometimes they're at the back of the parade sweeping up the horse apples. They're doing what it takes to get the job done, providing the support and the help that other people need to do their job. That's where Greenleaf kind of came. So he came up with these 10 characteristics of servant leadership. Listening, okay? We all listen, but do we hear? Remember we talked a moment ago about communication? Oftentimes, the most powerful message is the message that isn't said. It's the one that's implied in the tone, in the undercurrent of that communication. Empathy. How does empathy differ from sympathy? Sympathy is I feel sorry for you, right? Empathy is, I understand. I might feel sorry, but I might not. But I understand what you're going through. I have some sense of what that's like. I might not be able to fully appreciate it, but I have an idea about it. Healing. Most organizations are fractured. They're broken. There's people with, not just hurts that occur in the organization, but a lot of people in our organization come to work hurt. They've got broken spirits. Every one of us is dealing with something in our personal lives, aren't we, that's really important. And sometimes it gets magnified and it becomes intensified, and it's a big thing. In a leadership capacity, that's why you have to know your people. You have to recognize that, you're not performing at your optimum. Why not? Instead of coming and saying, why are you not doing your job? I told you I need this job done. You might approach and say, what's going on? You don't seem to be yourself today. Something going on that I should be aware of? Anything I can help you with? How does that approach look different than the one that said, hey, you're not doing your job, pick it up? Servant leaders are persuasive. They're persuasive beyond the boundaries of their organization. They're not only advocates for you, but they're advocates for your cause. And they're advocates, they're not just preaching to the choir, they're preaching to the people that don't even have a hymnal yet. So they become persuasive beyond their boundaries. They're aware of what's going on. I'm going to talk about vision here a little bit, but they have a sense of what's coming up, what's going to happen next. And how do they acquire that sense, but they develop it? They have foresight. We can think of vision as something like foresight. They can see down the road. They can use that awareness and say, if this happens, this is going to impact us this way. We need to be prepared for this. We need to be ready by doing something. They're able to conceptualize. They see the big picture. And then these last three are the three that I think are the most important. Servant leaders are committed to the growth of their people. They're not about making themselves look good. They're about making people in their organization look good. It's about growing more leaders. I have a sister who is a perfect example of a servant leader. She continually grows people who then take other leadership positions within her organization. In fact, I marvel at how she does her work. And she works in a very difficult situation. She works in the trauma unit at the Veterans Hospital in Salt Lake City. That's tough stuff. With people who put their lives on the line for our country, they're coming in without arms and legs and limbs, and their lives are shattered. And guess what? The people in her ward, her nurses that work for her, she hasn't had one want to transfer in the last 7 years. They love working there. How can you love working in an environment that is so sad? Oh, we love working with these people. We love working with each other. To me, that speaks volumes about the leader. She has created an environment where those people, even though they're surrounded by as much pain and discouraging, disheartening sort of things as you can imagine, those people love being there. They love the work they do. They're stewards. Servant leaders are stewards. What is a steward? It's somebody who leaves it better than they found it. They're out to make it better. Not for themselves, but for the rest of us. And of course, they're focusing on building community. And I think that's one thing that my sister does particularly well. She builds this community. As I said, nobody wants to leave. They have opportunities to get other jobs, but they don't want to leave. When they finally have to make that choice, it's done with sadness. And it's like, oh, I hate to leave you guys. All right, another skill I think you need is what's called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has 4 components to it. Here they are, but I'll show you another slide. It's self and social. And then it's awareness and regulation. So now, what's really interesting is that for a lot of us, we think that the secret to being a good leader and operating a good organization is you got to be smart. A couple of researchers by the name of Salovey and Mayer a few years ago began to embark part on this study, began to look at how people interacted with each other on an emotional level as opposed to an intellectual level. And then another guy came along, he's actually a reporter for the New York Times who earned a doctorate at Columbia University and started to do a little research. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And what he discovered, and what Salovey and Mayer actually discovered and Goldman popularized, was the whole idea that emotional intelligence is more important than IQ, that given an adequate amount of intellectual capacity, your IQ, it's your emotional, your ability to interface and interact with people, to regulate and monitor your own emotions, to recognize where your hot buttons are, how they get pushed, and how to deal with them when they do get pushed. Because we all have hot buttons, don't we? We all have things that push us, change our feelings. How do you modulate those? How do you regulate them? How do you control them? That's emotional intelligence. And then we went a step further and said, okay, well, what about other people? How do you deal with other people when their emotions are getting the better of them? Do you fight fire with fire? Somebody comes in screaming and hollering, do you scream back? What does that get you? A headache? Are you able to regulate your emotions and find a strategy or a way to help them moderate theirs? Do you have a social awareness and an ability to socially regulate? Can you empathize with them? Say, yeah, I understand. Here's a situation I had when I was a school principal. I had a kid go on a field trip. They went skiing. They had this activity. They got to go skiing. Well, the little kid filled his camel pack, his little backpack, with vodka. So he's out there skiing, and 8th grader, bombed out of his mind. Well, when they finally found him, he had passed out and was in a snowdrift and was almost hypothermic. They had to fly him, helicopter him off the. Well, Mama came in the next day. She was one PO'd Mama. She wanted to kill us for not monitoring her son more closely on this field trip. Well, I understand. If that was my child, I would be just as upset. It wasn't all our fault, but we'll take some responsibility. Yeah, probably somebody should have been checking a little bit more, but at the same time, this is a group process. So, but I could have screamed back at her and said, well, if you weren't such an unfit parent and letting your kid get into the liquor cabinet and fill his camel pack with vodka, this probably wouldn't have happened. I could have taken that tack, but where would that gotten me? We'd have been going like this for hours, wouldn't we? Instead, I had to empathize with her. I had to say, okay, I understand your feelings. Yeah, what a terrible thing. I can't imagine what you're going through. To have your child almost die. Oh, I feel so bad for you. But being able to, and remember, I'm not a touchy-feely kind of guy. I had to work at this to say, because my initial reaction was like, shut up and learn to be a better mom. That was my initial reaction. But it wasn't going to give me what I wanted. I had to be able to self-regulate and say, that's not the tactic that's going to help. What's the strategy that I need to use? I need to empathize. I need to help this mom understand that, oh gosh, we're all so sad. And what are we going to do so this never happens again? Well, we can do a better job. We should maybe taking a sip out of the camel pack when you came. I don't know. That's a risky deal. See all the chaperones like, hey, let me tell you, taste from your camel pack. No, it might have been flying, Who knows if I had to fly the chaperones off the mountain. I don't know. So you can see emotional intelligence is being able to self-regulate, both self-recognize and self-regulate, and then socially recognize and socially regulate. So being able to manage yourself and your emotions, and then that of those around you. And that it becomes such an important part of what we're doing, because we're just involved in these organizations are so tightly interwoven, and they're so fluid, they're constantly changing, that we have to have those really unique and specially adapted personalities and emotional skills in order to function effectively. And then the other particular skill I think you need to have is a thing called appreciative inquiry. Now, if you just think of that title, appreciative inquiry. Inquiry implies what? Questioning, doesn't it? An analysis. Thought-provoking. We're going to dig into this a little bit. Well, what are we going to dig into? What are we looking for? Appreciative, which means the good, right? The positive. What are the positive takeaways from this particular thing? So it's a different kind of way of looking at problem solving. And I'll walk you through this here a little bit. So What I like about AI is it's collaborative. It supports the servant leadership approach. It supports emotional and social intelligence. You know, most of us operate on the idea, I'll believe it when I see it. But in truth, most of us operate on the things that I'll believe it, or I'll see it when I believe it. That sometimes the truth we don't even recognize until we can somehow recognize that that is the truth. We tend to see the world as we describe it as opposed to the way it really is. So we've got to sort of begin to think differently.